Hello, cruel, cruel world. My name is Dr. Shaham Das. I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I assess mentally disordered offenders for a living so that you don't have to. You can call me the ominous Shahamanous now. Just like you, I watched Baby Reindeer. Just like you, I watched the interview with Piers Morgan. But what fascinated me the most is people's reaction to that interview with Fiona HARVEY. There were thousands of comments, almost every single one saying that Fiona HARVEY definitely is Martha and she's definitely lying. Now, I think I might be the only person in the world that is taking a contrary view. I'm not trying to be controversial, not trying to be contentious, cantankerous. I might be showing off my vocabulary and my alliteration, but I think that everybody has just missed the point, and I'll explain why in this video. Now, obviously, I've not assessed Fiona HARVEY in person, but I do have some general expertise. I've assessed numerous mentally ill stalkers. I've given evidence in criminal trials, so I know how a typical stalker presents. So I'm going to try and get some of that knowledge into you. In fact, I was on ITV'S this morning on the very day that the interview dropped last week. I've done a couple of newspaper interviews about this case. So I'm partially trying to emphasize my expertise and I'm partially showing off here. But what I'm basically here to tell you in this video about the 5 myths is there's just too much speculation. Nobody really knows the truth, and people on the internet are making too many assumptions. So in this video, I'm going to urge you to be a bit more skeptical and to take what you hear with a pinch of pepper. I'm going to talk about whether we'll ever know the truth, for example, through the Freedoms of Information Act. Okay, enough foreplay, let's get into those myths. By the way, all of these myths are kind of based on YouTube comments that I've read, of which there are hundreds of negative ones about Fiona HARVEY. Okay, myth number 1 about Fiona HARVEY and Piers Morgan's interview is that she's lying because she contradicted herself and because she is vague. So I think we need to be really careful about accusing Fiona of seemingly contradicting her own points. She certainly was a little bit vague in her recollection at times, but we have to, in my opinion, take this into the context that she's been grilled about events that happened many years ago, which according to her seemed trivial at the time. So yeah, she's vague, but that in itself is not proof of lying. I'm not saying she's definitely telling the truth, but I'm just saying that other people, outsiders, myself included, cannot definitively decide. So if you ask me a fairly banal question, let's say, I don't know, when's the last time that you had dinner with 10 people? I would have to think about that. It would take me a while to answer, and that's just a harmless question. So let's put ourselves in Fiona HARVEY's position. She's already displeased and agitated about being outed. She's already received a lot of unwanted attention and even hate on the internet. And then she's being grilled by Piers Morgan on a huge platform. She knows she's under scrutiny. She knows that it's going to get millions of views. I think at the time of me recording this, over 10 million views. She's almost certainly nervous. She's not like a seasoned media personality. She's not me on This Morning, charming the lovely Cat Deely. So a lot of people say that Fiona HARVEY contradicted herself. You know, at one point she said she met Gad 3 or 4 times. Later on, she said 5 or 6 times, I believe. And yeah, I admit that is vague, but that's not the same as it being a lie. Remember, if she's telling the truth, and again, I'm not saying that she is, but hypothetically, if she's telling the truth, these are incidents from 2015. That's almost a decade ago. And there's no reason for her to remember accurately the number of meetings. So if you ask me, how many times did you email your accountant 10 years ago? I might say 4 or 5. And in the same conversation, I might say 5 or 6 or 7 or 8. That doesn't mean I'm lying. It just means that I'm unsure of the answer. Also, I think it's fair to say that Piers Morgan's cross-examination of her was fairly aggressive. He constantly interrupted her. I can't think of one instance where she actually finished a sentence without him asking her another in a series of a barrage of questions. And it had the vibe of like a murder detective, not a talk show host. And you could argue that he was doing what the viewers wanted, what you or I wanted, which is to try and catch her off guard. But is that fair? I don't know. That's a different topic. Moving on. Myth number 2 about the Fiona HARVEY Piers Morgan's interview is that she's lying because she lacked convictions in her answers or she took too long to answer. Okay, I'll admit that I am kind of stretching out the previous myth, but I won't tell if you don't tell. And there were a few times where Fiona seemed unsure about her answer, and it did take her a while to answer. But on top of that, Piers pointed out that she didn't seem confident in some of her claims at times, having made statements like she doubts whether Richard would have her voicemail, and even if he did have the emails, etc., etc. But My point is, I think what we're seeing is Fiona HARVEY being flustered or being nervous because she's participating in such a personal and such a high profile interview. Again, I'm not saying she's definitively telling the truth. What I'm saying is we cannot assume that she's lying. Because remember, this is not a prepared statement, which would be different. She's not had time to think about and digest and word each answer perfectly. You know, I'm a forensic psychiatrist. I assess anywhere between 3 to 5 people a week. And I have to say that people accidentally use the word fish regularly. And it doesn't just happen occasionally, it happens all the banana. So come on, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. You've had conversations with people. You use the wrong fish every once in a while. Is some of what Fiona HARVEY said suspicious? Yeah, I think so. At a stretch, possibly suspicious. I'll give you an example. She said she had 6 different email IDs now when she was being asked by Piers if she used the same email address as when she was writing to Richard. And I'll give you that, it is a little bit odd, but to me, it doesn't necessarily ring alarm bells. So I personally have 4 different email addresses simply because they've changed over time and I use them for different reasons. I mean, it could be the possibility of deception, 6 email addresses, but again, that's not definitive proof. That's just a suggestion, a mild indication at best. So as you might have done, I've seen all these YouTube so-called experts on body language coming on and saying that she's lying because she did this and this. I don't mean to be rude, and right, anybody has the right to make YouTube videos, but it's all bullshit. It's not reliable in any way as evidence. And how do I know? What gives me the audacity to say that? Well, I've provided written evidence in criminal trials, and at least, if I'm talking about written reports, at least 400 occasions I've physically sworn in, you know, all the suits, sworn, put my hand on the Bible or confirmation for me, given evidence, been cross-examined maybe 50 times in my career, and not once have they ever used a body language expert or even a lie detector test. By the way, see my other videos on how lie detector tests are unreliable and how to beat one. Always be plugging. The uncomfortable truth is this, right? People are really bad at guessing if an individual is telling the truth or lying. And there's lots of reasons to that, including our own biases, which I will come on to. In fact, studies have shown that even judges and murder detectives are only marginally better, slightly better by a couple of % than flipping a coin in knowing if somebody is telling the truth or lying. And I think that's what's happening here. Our biases are coming into view. People are already primed to doubt, to discredit, even detest Fiona because they've seen a version of her on Baby Reindeer. But that doesn't translate to the truth. That's the point I'm trying to make. It's essentially a mockery of the real criminal justice procedure. There's a term for it. I believe it's known as a koala court. Another way of saying all of this, right, is this. If I was told that I had to write a psychiatric court report that was formal evidence in a criminal trial, and I know this isn't formal evidence, but let's just say hypothetically, even if I was instructed by Gad's solicitors, even if I was on his side, even if they were paying me, with the information that I've seen in the Piers Morgan interview, I at a stretch might say that some of what she said was odd, some of it was slightly potentially suspicious, but I definitely would not say that she definitively was lying. So as the great philosopher Socrates from Bill and Ted once said, true knowledge is in knowing that we know nothing. Okay, myth number 3 is that the truth will come out and that somehow this is connected to the Freedom of Information Act. You're not going to like this one, I'm afraid. But before I get into that, I'm just going to introduce you to my channel, Schmike for Small Minds. I make a smorgasbord of videos related to true crime and offending. I've done various myths. I'll put the links in the descriptions to my interview on This Morning last week about this very case. I've also got a video, 5 myths about stalkers, which you might be interested in. I'll put the links in. I implore you to subscribe. Not only does it help me out immeasurably, but you will never get a parking ticket ever again, guaranteed, or your money back. If you're new to this channel, then usually my videos are edited and pre-scripted and blah, blah, blah. But I have the editing skills of a special needs salamander with learning disabilities, and I wanted to release this video quickly, so getting it done by my proper editor, shout out to Riyadh, would have just taken too long. Anyway, moving on to myth number 3. As I said, the truth will come out, freedom of information. I've seen this phrase, Freedom of Information Act, used in the YouTube channel. Okay, firstly, I would say that there are some huge discrepancies between what Gad says happens and what Fiona is saying happens. For example, Fiona said she sent maybe a dozen emails as opposed to the 41,000 that Gad claimed. Also, Gad says that she'd been to prison for stalking in relation to this, and she claims that that's completely untrue. So everyone in the internet rightly says that it's easy to disprove these facts by the authority. That is true. I agree. But that's not the point. That's not the question. The question is, who are these authorities and why would they be releasing this information? What's their reasoning? If it's simply to quench the public's fascination, with all due respect, that's pretty flipping arrogant for you to think that they're going to do that for that reason. I know you want answers and I want answers as well, but just because you watched a TV show, even if it's a popular TV show, that's not enough for them to investigate. Police don't just release this kind of information because you are curious. Now, you could say that if there is a civil court case, then that might be necessary. If Fiona will be suing Netflix, I'll come on to that, then GAD would likely need to produce this information to discredit Fiona. But that is not the same as using the Freedom of Information Act, because that's used to request data from a public authority. So here's some common examples just for your edification. If it's about transparency and accountability for a government authority, then you can use the Freedom of Information Act to get a better understanding of how this authority is making decisions or spending public funds. You can ask for reports on projects or initiatives. You can, for example, find out if contracts are being awarded to private companies, such as PPE for COVID. All of that is about data on public services. You can ask for crime rates, school performance, etc., etc. And on top of all of that, research and public interest could be a reason for the freedom of information. It can be a valuable tool for journalists, researchers to gather information for the public interest. For example, environmental data, pollution levels, public health statistics, all of that stuff. But can you argue that this is for the public interest? Honestly, I actually don't know. I mean, it is a TV show, isn't it? This is myself included, this is because we're curious. It's not for the well-being or safety of the public in general. So as I mentioned, Fiona said in the interview with Piers that she's going to sue Netflix, and she said that, but I'm afraid to tell you that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen. I know I'm being a bit of a killjoy, and I apologise for pissing on your parade, but I'm just giving you a reality check. There's loads of reasons why it might not happen. Firstly, Fiona HARVEY could be saying this now, and maybe she means it now. Maybe after a while she's calmed down, the dust will have settled, and she changed her mind because she just doesn't want to go through that fairly difficult taxing process. She doesn't put herself out there in the media, so she might not do that. Or she might want to do it, but her defence team might say that she doesn't have a case, either because she is lying, which is possible, or she's telling the truth, but Netflix can argue that it's based on a fictionalized version. So for that reason, she doesn't have a case. More on that concept later on in this episode. Or she could have an out-of-court settlement. She might be offered loads of money by Netflix, so she doesn't want to risk getting less money and going through a trial. If any of these things happen, then we probably will not learn the truth because there's no reason for that information to be leaked. Now, obviously, it goes without saying that GAD himself could reveal this information. I mean, it would literally take him less than a minute to pull up 41,000 emails. But I think that he's already feeling a bit exposed, a bit perturbed by this unwanted attention. He might even feel guilty about the exposure on Fiona HARVEY, regardless of whether she's telling the truth or not. Moving on, myth number 4 about the Piers Morgan Fiona HARVEY interview is that she's clearly mentally ill from the interview. I've seen this statement so many times in the YouTube comment. So as a brief overview, as I said, I've assessed professionally numerous stalkers, and many of them have bizarre and potentially dangerous character peculiarities. However, only a very small proportion will have a literal, diagnosable, treatable mental illness. So first, let's diagnose Martha, the character Martha from Baby Reindeer. The purpose of these videos, I want you to start thinking like a forensic psychiatrist, also to take over the world. That's not going great. So I think we need to separate the errant personality traits from actual mental illness. Martha clearly was obsessive, she was narcissistic, she was deceptive, she was fanatical, she was a fantasist, she was extremely stubborn, she was obstinate, she wouldn't take no for an answer. She was also vindictive once she didn't get her own way. So in my opinion, Martha very likely had some sort of personality disorder, i.e. there's something wrong with her inherent disposition, her inherent characteristics, which bled into this skewed perspective of the world and of herself. However, that's different from an actual mental illness, which is a chemically imbalanced change from one's normal baseline self. So the next logical question is, does the character Martha have a mental illness? Now, I'm not trying to blow my own clarinet here, but this is literally what I do professionally as an expert witness. I've literally made these diagnoses for a living so that you don't have... Sorry, I'm getting confused. So, in my opinion, Martha probably does have an additional degree of depression, which is a mental illness. I don't think that's particularly relevant in her presentation. She might have, and I think she does have, the character Martha this is, erotomania. So that's also known as de Clerambault syndrome. It's very rare, but it's common in stalkers. It's a mental health condition where the individual has a fixed and false belief that another person, usually of a higher social status or somebody they don't know well, is intensely in love with them. And this is mental illness. It's not based on reality, and it persists despite evidence to the contrary. And the person with erotomania might misinterpret everyday events as signs, secret signs of love from the other person. The exact cause is unknown, but it's thought to be related to a variety of factors like schizophrenia, like bipolar disorder. So a brilliant example of erotomania I've mentioned in a previous video about stalking, which is David Letterman. So he had a stalker in the 80s, I believe, called Peggy, and she genuinely believed through delusional mental illness that he was the father of her son, even though they'd never met before. And I'm afraid I don't have time to tell you my Psych for Sore guys and girls to teach you about the birds and the bees, but a mummy and a daddy, they have to have met. There needs to be some physical contact. And she genuinely believed it. Even though they'd never met, she believed that he was the father. So she was delusional. She was psychotic. She was out of touch of reality. Now, here's the point I'm trying to make about this myth. I seem to be, as far as I can tell, the only person on the internet that thinks this. But in my opinion, there was no overt signs of mental illness within Fiona Harvey in the interview with Piers Morgan. If Fiona Harvey had erotomania, as I believe the character Martha did, she would genuinely believe that she was in a relationship with Gad. She would have believed that they love each other and that they both made romantic gestures to each other, that he did the same to her in her delusional mind. She would have been confused at the concept of why she's being accused of stalking. But that is not the case. That is not what we saw with Fiona. Fiona understood that she was being accused of stalking, even if she denied it. She denied a relationship. She said they barely knew each other. So that's 100% absolutely not what erotomania is. So if Fiona Harvey did everything that Gad claimed, if that's the truth, if what Gad says is true, then clearly she was lying very openly and relatively confidently, not very confidently, but she was lying, barefaced lying, let's put it that way, in the interview with Piers Morgan. But I don't think that suggests that she's a cold-blooded or callous or a psychopath, as many people have said on the internet, because that is what a normal person who is lying looks like. That's what lying looks like. Here's the thing. Think about it like this, right? If Fiona Harvey is telling the truth, and I think it's unlikely, right? But can we at least agree that there's a 1% chance that she's telling the absolute truth and that Gad made this all up? Hypothetically, as a thought exercise, how different would you have expected her to present? So what do you expect her to be like on Piers Morgan? She would be ill at ease. She would be irritated, she would be indignant, she would be irate. God, I must arrest this awful, annoying alliteration. But how did she present on Piers Morgan? She presented as all of those things, didn't she? Am I wrong? So the point I'm trying to make is that you can't say she was lying or that she's a psychopath or that she's a cold-blooded liar based on how she presented, because she presented how you and I would have presented in that situation, I believe. Okay, we're almost there. Home stretch, you can do it, get you back into it. The fourth and final myth, and this is a biggie smalls. You're not going to like this. Myth number 5 about Fiona and Martha is that Fiona definitely is Martha. Okay, now before you get your panties in a bunch, let me explain myself. Obviously, there's definitely a huge overlap between the character Martha and Fiona. I'm not denying that. They're both Scottish, they're both overweight, I think it's fair to say. Fiona said that she had a baby toy reindeer. There was a comment about curtains and that being a euphemism for sex, hanging your curtains. But everybody in the world, apart from me, seems to be making the assumption that this is a linear story. So what I'm trying to say is nobody seems to be open to the possibility. I'm not even saying it's definitely happening. I'm just saying the possibility that Gad has merged two completely separate characters into one, right? So maybe there was a stalker that's not Fiona. Maybe there was Miss S, who sent Gad 41,000 emails. Maybe he also knew Fiona Harvey around the same period of time. And simply to base the character on somebody, simply to get a narrative of what she should look like, what she should act like, what she should sound like as a picture in his head that can be replicated, he's merged those two characters. Now, I'm not trying to plug my own book, but I secretly am in two minds. This is lots of my clinical stories of my true life cases. And I've done that. I've merged two cases into one. Now, it's slightly different because, first of all, I'm bound by the patient-doctor confidentiality. And also, when I've done that, it's been two characters that have done the same thing, In fact, I've even done that with the Stalker, so 2 different characters, and I've merged them into one, but they've committed the same offence. But what I'm saying is it's not beyond the possibility, the realms of possibility, that Gad had been thinking of a completely different person in mind, and to protect that person made it into the character of Martha that was based on Fiona. Does that make sense? So the actual look and the demographics are based on Fiona, but not the Stalker, which is somebody else. It's possible. And you could argue that that is callous, and you could argue that it's thoughtless, and that's true, but I don't think he realised it would be so popular. And remember, he already made a fictionalised version of this for his show in Edinburgh, and that wouldn't have got, even if it was a good show, and I'm sure it was, that would have been seen by hundreds of people, thousands at stretch, not millions. So I don't think he would have known back then that this would turn into such a big deal. And also, countless shows go under the radar on Netflix. There wasn't that much promo. I don't think Gad, or maybe even Netflix, genuinely appreciated that there would be this level of scrutiny, that people would investigate to this degree, that people would try and find out who Martha's based on. So I think it's just maybe sort of callousness and kind of indifference rather than an intention to deceive. So that's not what I'm saying. Kind of connected to this, I've seen another repeated comment which really gets my donkey on YouTube, which is that because Jessica Gunning, who the actress that played Martha Scott, seems so similar to Fiona Harvey, therefore they must be the same person, therefore Fiona Harvey must be lying. That doesn't make sense to me. I might be the only person on the internet that disagrees with this, but I don't think the similarities are that obvious, apart from the basic ones. They're both Scottish, they're both, how do I put this nicely, rotund. But outside of that, I don't think there's any proof in what I've seen that their mannerisms are particularly the same. If you disagree with me, then first of all, how dare you? No, I'm kidding. If you disagree with me, I urge you to go and watch the Piers Morgan's interview again. Because remember this, Martha had this creepy stare. She suddenly lost her temper. She had this vindictive kind of countenance and this scowl when she was wronged. Those were her specific character traits. Those were her tells if we were playing poker. I didn't see any of that from Fiona Harvey. She looked a bit flustered. She looked a bit irritated. She was trying to stand her ground. But as I said, she was answering this machine gun barrage of questions from Piers Morgan. She wasn't even allowed to finish the sentence. So I guess my point is that in itself, to me, is not the same as the depiction of Martha. I really think this is related to our confirmation bias because we've watched her in Baby Reindeer, because we've already made up our minds that she's guilty. Okay, kind of connected to this, just another concept that I want to bring round. One huge factor that I don't think has been discussed very much at all, if ever, in all of the articles I've read, is this is a true story versus this is based on a true story. Now, Gad himself has even said in previous interviews before the real Fiona Harvey was discovered, he's even said that he's exaggerated some elements of the story for artistic license. And, you'd expect that. Now, you could argue that Netflix could have made it clearer. So, for example, they could have said, as you do in some kind of dramas, before every episode, it could have written on the screen, some scenes and some characters have been fictionalized. They could have said that, and they didn't. But the counter argument of that is, surely that's obvious, isn't it? Because the main character is not called Richard Gad. The main character is called Donnie. Is it Donnie Dunn? So the very fact that he's not using the real name, doesn't that imply overtly that it is a fictionalized version? So another way of saying that is if you watched 8 Mile, you wouldn't just suddenly go, oh wait, hang on, Eminem's mother isn't really Kim Basinger. Everybody, this whole thing must be fictional. It must be bullshit. That's not his real mum. Of course it's not his real mum. It's a dramatized version of that. So another kind of point I want to make that I don't think that I know of or I've read anyone's picked up on is that this was not a Netflix original. So it's very possible that the production company put the thing at the beginning, which is, this is a true story as opposed to this is based on a true story. And Netflix might have bought it as a package with that already created. They might not have even put that much thought into the exact words because, again, I don't think they appreciated that it would be so popular. I don't think they realized it would become a big deal eventually. Okay, right, I've blabbered on enough. I've done with my myths, but I just want to leave you the final thought, okay? Again, I'm not saying this is likely, but I'm saying that it's not impossible, right? Think about this. What if the truth lies somewhere in the middle? What if, for example, Fiona Harvey sent, 20 or 30 emails? So not 41,000, but not a handful either. Supposing she got like a warning from the police, but she didn't go to prison time. Supposing Gad massively exaggerated all of this, all of the behavior, maybe, again, as I said, potentially being based on another real-life character that we know nothing about, Miss S. Supposing all of that happened, and supposing he didn't do this intentionally to lie or to get anybody into trouble, but simply because it would make for a more interesting show, where would that lead us? Would this still constitute as stalking? I don't know. Maybe. Creepy behavior? Yes. Stalking? Probably not. So I guess what I'm trying to say is everybody seems to be thinking either one or the other is telling the truth, and almost everybody, if not everybody that I've seen comments on, believes that Fiona's lying. But I'm just letting you know that it's theoretically possible that there's a space in between where neither of them are fully wrong and neither of them are fully right. And if that is the case, if I'm right, then the issue might actually be more about how much the character is fictionalized rather than the actual stalking behavior. So I'm just going to summarize. What I'm saying is, unfortunately, I think there's too many unanswered questions, too much speculation, too much conspiracy theories. At the time of me making this video, which is 14th of May, we don't have enough evidence to definitively know the answers. Like you, I hope in time that everything will be revealed because I'm curious like you, but I also believe that it's not a certainty. I don't mean to be rude, but we have no legal claim to this information, even if you want to know. I've been called many things in my life. I don't think I've ever been called the voice of reason, but I genuinely think I might be in this case. I really think that what we're seeing here is an en masse public version of textbook confirmation bias. And we're also confusing the blurred line between fact and fiction. When I say we, I mean you guys. I'm far too skeptical. So this is my final thought, right? Let me put this question to you, and I really want you to think about this, my Psych for Sore guys and gals, and let me know your thoughts in the comment section. If Fiona HARVEY had made a Netflix series about somebody lying about stalking, about somebody making these accusations, and if she had a very convincing, fairly handsome young Scottish actor who looked and sounded like Gad as a character, right? And then if Gad was cross-examined by Piers Morgan, would you believe him? Or would you assume that he's lying because you've seen a version of the truth on TV? Dun dun dun. Anyways, that's enough rambling. Have a blessed day. I love you. Watch the rest of my videos and stay euthymic.